Hello and welcome to the Money Street. The old continent of Europe is about to go through a terrible economic crisis, and the cause of this economic crisis is due to its energy dependence. Europe is a relatively small and highly populated continent, which is very dependent on gas and oil imports, mostly from Russia. Since the beginning of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the European Union followed in the footsteps of the US and imposed sanctions on Russia. In other words, the European Union banned the import of Russian products and services. There is one resource that Europe cannot afford to stop importing, and that is Russian gas. The European economy is highly dependent on Russian gas, and many countries have Russian gas as their economic foundation. But what will happen? Thanks to the sanctions and tension between Russia, Europe and the US, Putin has slowly stopped exporting to Europe, and now, the risk that Russian gas will stop flowing to Europe is higher than ever. This was probably a poorly thought out strategy by the European Union. It is very easy for the US to sanction Russia and ban Russian imports as it is not dependent on Russian gas and oil, but for Europe this is not so easy. As a result, electricity, gasoline and natural gas prices across Europe have skyrocketed, leading to an energy crisis not seen for decades. In addition, as you may have seen in the news, the euro is at all-time lows against a dollar. We are in a state of emergency in Europe, and the worst thing about this whole situation is that the European Union is a fragile alliance. A couple of years ago, one of the most important nations in the alliance, the United Kingdom, divorced from the European Union, and a few years before that, many European countries like Greece, Italy, and Spain had to be rescued by richer countries like Germany. Although the European Union has a firm stance against Ukraine, many countries like France, Italy, and Germany are now stepping back and suggesting negotiating with the Russians. The future of Europe is a very dangerous and uncertain one. In this video I will explain why the European Union is about to enter one of the most severe economic crises in its history. In order to understand the seriousness of the situation, we have to start talking about the production of electricity and heating in Europe. Here in this graph we will be able to see the main sources of electricity production. In the European Union, number 1 is nuclear power, responsible for 26% of all electricity generated. But in second place is natural gas, which is responsible for almost 20% of all electricity production. When it comes to heating, natural gas is responsible for 38% of all heating in the European Union. Although we are talking about electricity production and heating, natural gas is also important for cooking, certain vehicles and also other industrial applications. So, as you will see, both the society and the economy of the European Union are highly dependent on natural gas. Many years ago, the European Union was self-sustainable when it had gas and oil from the North Sea, but since the 1990s, this gas and oil was running out, and Europe started to import these resources from foreign countries. Now, when it comes to natural gas production, Russia is the second largest producer of natural gas in the world, after the USA. When gas and oil from the North Sea ran out, Europe began to look for alternatives. One of them was the development of nuclear energy, another was the development of renewable energies, but another alternative was the import of gas from Russia via multi-billion-dollar pipelines. But the relationship between Europe and Russia in terms of natural gas and oil is very complex. As I showed you earlier, natural gas is an indispensable natural resource in the European economy and society. The European Union is the world's largest importer of natural gas, and almost 45% of all natural gas in Europe is imported from Russia. Russia, for decades now, has been starting to export cheap oil to the European Union, but the country that especially benefited from this gas was Germany. Germany has been importing natural gas from the Soviet Union since the 1970s, and in exchange for this gas, Germany exported steel products. This was an extremely beneficial trade for both countries. On the one hand, it was convenient for the Soviet Union because it generated a lot of money and imported steel products, and on the other hand, Europe enjoyed low natural gas prices for its population and its factories. As the years went by, dependence intensified, and in the midst of the Cold War, one country opposed this trade and dependence. That country was the United States. The United States did not want a Soviet Union doing business with Germany, as it was one of the most important allies at the time. Therefore, for decades there were political obstacles that hindered the potential of this trade, but when the Soviet Union fell, Russia began to export to more countries and gas pipelines and gas distribution systems worth billions of dollars were built. If you are enjoying this video and want to be aware of new videos, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. As you will see on this map, and now today, the vast majority of countries in the European Union that import such gas from Russia are highly dependent on Russian gas, as Russian gas accounts for 45% of all gas in the European Union. Germany, for example, owes much of its economic development in recent decades to cheap gas from Russia, as this gas was very cheap, was reliable and was also considered a source of green energy. Europe has for 2 decades now set targets to stop emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and natural gas, although a non-renewable resource, emits very little carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. All these elements have contributed to making German industry, German vehicles and almost everything Germany exports cheaper and more competitive. Germany, for many decades, was one of the top 3 exporting countries in the world, and to be able to power all the exporting factories it was and is crucial to have cheap energy. To give you an idea of how intense the dependence between Germany and Russia was, this is the former Chancellor of Germany, Gerhard Schröder. He was a close friend of Putin and was nominated to the board of directors of Gazprom, the giant Russian oil and gas producer. Of course, all this was in spite of the fact that the US was calling Germany's bluff for buying Russian gas, so no doubt the benefits and the dependency between Germany and Russia are and were tremendous. But now let's go back to 2022 and the war. In response to the war, the European Union followed in the footsteps of the US and imposed very strict sanctions on all Russian imports. The idea was to push Russia into an economic crisis so that it would suffocate and throw in the towel. This has not happened so far. In fact, the idea of the European Union was not very well thought out because it caused chaos in the European energy market. Electricity prices are at record highs. As you will see in this graph, compared to 2020 prices have risen almost 30 times more, and they do not stop rising. The reason for this price spike is because Russia has been gradually stopping selling gas to Europe, and here are 2 very important details. These are the electricity prices. As I showed you, the European Union does not only produce electricity thanks to Russian gas, it has other sources such as nuclear energy and renewable energies. Despite all this, the price of electricity skyrocketed like never before. The other detail is that the European Union has gas reserves for emergencies, and despite these reserves, still the price of gas in Europe and electricity have skyrocketed. So imagine what is going to happen when winter comes to Europe. The continent also relies on gas to heat its homes and buildings. This is going to be a very cold and very difficult winter for the European Union, and how do you think the governments of the European Union are responding to such chaos? Believe it or not, the German government, despite having sustainable and environmentally friendly laws, is now reactivating its coal-fired power plants. This sounds completely ridiculous since the European Union always criticizes countries that derive their energy from burning coal, but now that the European Union has dug its own grave, it prefers to change its environmental policies and reactivate old, coal-burning, environmentally polluting power plants rather than do business with the Russians. And what do you think Russia is doing with all the excess gas and oil it has? Well, they are selling it to China and India at discounted prices. For China and India this is a perfect situation, but for the European Union this situation is a nightmare. Anyway, the big question here is what effect this is going to have on the economy of the European Union. Let me tell you. The situation in Europe is going to get very ugly. Russian gas is still flowing into the European Union, but at much lower levels. If Putin wanted to, he could stop exporting gas to Europe, leading us to an economic catastrophe. The first obvious effect is that inflation, which is already at record highs across Europe, will worsen since gas is such an important resource for European society. If gas prices go up, then the prices of absolutely everything in Europe will also go up, leading to exaggerated inflation. But this is a perfect storm because the world economy is about to enter a recession. Central banks around the world have stopped printing money and are now raising central bank interest rates, which makes all debts more expensive. This usually leads to a recession in the economy, and as you will know from my video about coming recession, all the alarm bells are ringing. A recession means less productivity, a higher unemployment rate and negative growth in a country's gross domestic product. Add to this the astronomical energy prices, and you have a perfect storm. Here governments are going to have to step in and act fast by spending more money to generate more jobs. But the big problem is that many of the countries in the European Union have record levels of debt. Earlier I mentioned Greece, Italy, Portugal, and Spain as highly indebted countries. Well, these countries are still fully indebted. And if you are an environmentally conscious person, well, as I mentioned, Europe is now going to go back to relying on coal as a source of energy, so the situation in Europe is looking very bad. And the thing doesn't end here. The entire euro, which was always considered a much stronger currency than the dollar, is now at parity with the dollar. That is, €1 was normally worth the equivalent of $1.22. Now €1 is equivalent to $1, and it looks like it will be worth less than $1. In other words, the dollar is now going to be more powerful than the euro. So, the big question here is what the other countries in the European Union will do. It remains to be seen whether they will maintain the sanctions against Russian oil and gas, as many countries have been discussing just this point, because the sanctions and the war are causing more damage to Europe than to Russia. Countries like France, Germany, and Italy are now opening up to dialogue with the Russians. French President Emmanuel Macron said it is better not to humiliate Putin and suggests that dialogue is best for everyone. But there are other Eastern European countries that are completely opposed to dialogue, and if there is one thing we have learned, it is that unions dissolve when there are internal conflicts and economic problems. For the European Union, this means a very serious problem and leaves the Union in a lot of uncertainty. This coming winter for Europe is going to be a very, very cold one. That leads me to ask you, who do you think is to blame for this crisis, the European politicians or Russia? Do you think it was a good idea to sanction Russia in this way?